it is not correct that after 30 years of democracy, you still have, on paper, a racial classification, because it makes those who know they are African, as you just said, but they are not treated as Africans. Maybe because they're not dark enough.
Dr. Mulder, you look at the Afrikaners, the history of your people. If you look at the history of your people, they were held back by the English. And with later days, they were enabled. They became more and more economically empowered. And they became economically empowered due to the policies of apartheid. Why can't the same be done for Black people? Why? And this baffles me.
You cannot tell me, Mr. President, that you are not smart enough to can come with another idea rather than race classification. Are you saying to me that the apartheid people, the apartheid government, was more intelligent than you? That they came up with that racial classification? You have to repeat what they said because you don't have another idea. So
now, this I find very worrying. I find it very worrying that we continue to have this notion that BEE is the one that's holding our economy back.
Policy, as far as I'm concerned, needs to take a different approach with regard to certain basic things that I don't know if you're prepared to do that with regard to Black economic empowerment.
And to have you, sir, saying Black economic empowerment is holding our economy back goes completely against even what the World Bank says.
For me, Ramaphosa's response to this question suggests that he thinks what is more important is to first get the equality of outcome right. In order for us to address the injustices of the past, in order for us to eventually get to a point where we don't have to have race classification, we first need to achieve an equality of outcome where we all are rich, we are all driving a Maserati. What this idea or this ambition of saying you want equality of outcome, what this does is it neglects human nature completely. And this is a fundamental point to state because human nature says we are all not the same. We are not all ambitious at the same level. Some people are lazy, some are not. Some people are very driven, some are not. Some people are willing to put in the hours and work till late to get something done. Some people want to sleep at 8 and they don't want to. So how can we have an equality of outcome?
Guys, so this is one of those videos I would admonish everyone to watch if possible till the very end, because it actually appears to me, like you guys know, I've actually been struggling to really understand this whole thing with BEE or the whole thing with BEE policies, and you know that has actually been a major topic on this channel, to really understand the basis and the roots for BEE and why, you know, after 30 years we've not had a leeway or a kind of like a get going for blacks in South Africa, so that we dump these BEE policies for its success, or we probably continue it in the light that we are leading to a much more prosperous black majority. But none of these have actually come to fruition, and so it's really important that we continuously critique and try to understand the roots and basis, especially for this broad-based black black economic empowerment. And it's really interesting for me because it says broad-based, then it's still black. So in other words, everyone who probably might be affected with this whole thing with BEE has to somewhat be related to black, but then broad-based in a really interesting sense, which is quite difficult to understand. But this week, a lot of things have been happening this week ever since President Ramaphosa came back from the United States, with the trip with Donald Trump. And there was a really interesting series of questions that were really thrown at him in this sort of question and answer sessions at the parliament. There were really interesting questions, both from the opposition, the EFF, the MK, but also these other smaller parties that make up the GNU and some other ones as well. But there are two really interesting ones in this video I really want us to talk about. And that's the question from Corner Mulder from the Freedom Front Party, and also this rep from ACDP. I think that's a really powerful question he actually threw to him, as you could see in the, at the beginning of this video. But one thing is clear. And it's the fact that a lot of voices have have actually begun to start questioning these whole issues with BEE, its efficacy. After 30 years, are we still supposed to continue carrying on with BEE policies and all of that? And I think one of the things that I usually speak about in this channel is that there has to be a critical mass, especially of black people, trying to really engage with these really difficult concepts. Because those of us from outside, this is a Nigerian, I try my best to highlight other outsiders, maybe from Ghana, from other countries, to try to really critique what's really going on in South Africa for probably the whole world to really understand what we are really dealing with in South Africa when we speak about persecution or oppression. And I'm beginning to really find some really interesting black South Africans themselves who are really beginning to really critique some of these issues. And that's one of the videos you'll be watching towards the end of this video. That's why I encourage you guys to watch this video to the end. Her name is June. I think it's a really new channel. She might be the next superstar on Kwazemi. But she's really soberly, in a really sober way, tearing into the reasons why she thinks BEE might be setting South Africa backwards, you know, and not leading necessarily to the prosperity of the supposed black majority that the program actually promised all these years. I think that's a video none of you should miss on this channel. But, you know, before that, we see a question by Connor Mulder and this ACDP rep really trying to really understand President Ramaphosa. And I think this is one thing for me that was really essential, in that it actually kind of like almost in a way exposes President Ramaphosa's motive or understanding of what BEE should be achieving. If you notice the response in the beginning of this video where in his response to, I think this is a response now to Connor Mulder, arguing that the Afrikaners rose to limelight, you know, after being kept down by the British because of apartheid policies. And as a result, why shouldn't this be actually done, you know, for the black people? So in other words, it almost appears as though President Ramaphosa is trying to replicate the kind of policies we saw during apartheid to help to elevate the black people, you know, from the despotence which we've seen the black majority suffer for all these years. But the problem now is the fact that 30 years down the line, we are not seeing those results. But if we try to compare with the apartheid regime, if I would argue now maybe from 1948 all the way to 1994, we would have 48, 58, 58, 68, 78, 88, 98, thereabout, will I say 46 years thereabout, we saw the progress we actually had, you know, by this apartheid machinery, although it had inculcations of oppression and, you know, dastardly act that, you know, had been criticized and, you know, whipped down, especially at the level of the United Nations. We actually saw what we could argue was some form of progress, you know, in terms of economic growth and, you know, the design and the emergence of industries, you know, in South Africa. But now this is 30 years down the line, and it actually appears that the complaints about BEE, the critique for BEE, both from blacks, from whites, from coloreds, seem to be increasing. And for me, that's really interesting to really understand and place into perspective, you know, this question now by Connor Mulder, in how he tries to ask, you know, President Ramaphosa if he would be able to do away with some of the policies that actually encompass BEE issues so that there can be growth, you know, in South Africa going forward. All right. And so I think this is one of the things that makes this video really interesting. And I would actually encourage you guys to watch till the end, especially the session where this ACDP rep actually asks him, you know, if he's not kind of like smart enough to find a different way to help grow or achieve this, you know, black, white or racial equality in terms of economics, rather than replicating the policies that we saw during the apartheid machinery going for. Really fantastic video, guys. I would really appreciate and encourage everyone to watch these videos to the end, from Connor Mulder's, you know, altercation with President Ramaphosa to President Ramaphosa's reply to this ACDP rep, and especially this lady, her channel goes by June, and she really tries to break from the perspective of a black South African. And this is why I think it's really important to have more educated black South Africans really engaging with this issue. She actually argues that she's the first to have a degree from her family. So you see, it's really interesting and important that more educated blacks are beginning to rise up to question some of these issues that actually have been raised a lot on this channel regarding BEE and some of these policies that have been passed these 30 years by the ANC and maybe maintained by the GNU going forward. So let's quickly patiently watch till the end of this video, all of these videos, and share your thoughts, guys, in the comments.
So the reason why BE is being questioned, and not just by people like Corne Mulder, it's being questioned, and it's a debate, actually, a topic of debate in many forums. And I think what Ramaphosa is missing is a very important point here, and that is South Africa is not growing. We are having a serious problem when it comes to economic growth, prosperity, and all of those things. And the reason why BE is then linked to lack of growth is because if you think about the tender portion, which obviously BE supports or aids the tender system in terms of where tenders go, government tenders go, there has been a lot of wastage in that regard. And all of this is in the news. It's there for everyone to see. So it is just natural that people begin to start looking at these government policies and asking questions, right? Because now there is no growth. So the natural reaction is that people begin to even resent these policies. The more that they question, the more that they start to see the failures that are coming up, the more that people begin to have a lot of resentment. It's totally different when people are in a more different state of mind, when people feel like they're getting returned for their income, when we are not in a situation where the value of the money we're earning is decreasing every single year. You've got a complete different situation in that case, because people would be more than happy to support policies like the BE. Just to give you guys a quick recap of the key focus areas, according to the government website, of what BE is intended to achieve, right? BE is set out to increase Black ownership in business. It's set out to ensure that Black individuals hold positions of leadership and decision-making, investing in the training and development of Black employees, supporting the growth and development of Black-owned businesses, promoting initiatives that benefit the broader community, particularly Black communities. That's the intention of BE, right? Now the question is, why has BE failed? Why is BE in the spotlight? And I think it's simple. It's the lack of being able to get to the grassroots, right? Being able to benefit people who are at the grassroots level. And these are people who are either having low to no skills at all, no form of tertiary education, and even in some instances, basic education is either non-existent or not of good quality. These are people who would mostly be young people, so they don't have exposure, they don't have experience between that, 18 to 25 year gap, right? This is why BE has failed, because now you've got a larger portion of your population who is not benefiting. Big problem, because now you've got this massive backlog. Now, on the other hand, BE, for people who praise it, for people who say, no, BE has done something. You know, there has been progress as a result of BE. What's actually happened is that BE has created like this concentrated group, this concentrated block, I would say, right? And in this block, you find high corruption, because the process of BE is prone to corruption. If you look at all the reports and how it happens, if you understand sort of the state capture and the MO there, BE was a vehicle in terms of creating this corruption that we see today. Hence, just another thing when it comes to governments, and so especially governments that are more socialism focused, is that the ideas and it just all sounds so good, but the implementation is just scary. So in my mind, when I think about it now in retrospect, because obviously now you're just reflecting on all of these things, it was bound to happen. Hence, if you look at sort of the conversation on BE now, there's a lot of ideas that are coming on the table where people are saying, no, maybe let's look at BE from first prioritizing the need for someone to get these priorities, to get this sort of step up and all of that, as opposed to using skin color. And it's also quite simple to understand why ideas of focusing on need and not skin color when it comes to things like BE, employment equity, and so forth, why that has not been welcomed. In fact, Ramaphosa does not even touch on that as a potential path to still keep the BE Act. It's simple. The ANC gets a lot of power from the benefits that people get through these types of acts. When they know that if they have close proximity to government leaders, they have priority when it comes to tenders. So there's a lot of benefits that come with these types of policies for people who are close to the ANC. We see this time and time again. And the ANC gets a lot of support from that, because the moment the money dries out, the likelihood is that a lot of people will just turn their backs, right? You also have the character of Dintswalo, who Ramaphosa put on the map last year, telling us about Tintswalo, who's gone through the system because of the ANC, making sure that there's enough for funding, getting through university. A lot of people say, I'm in a job now, I got through NSFS, I got through university because of the ANC, and that alone gives the ANC so much support. So there is a lot of that in terms of why we are not seeing different ways of approaching this, because now it's clear that what's happening now is not working because so many people are still left out and not really benefiting. But because this bloc that is benefiting is basically what's holding the power together. They're the ones that are hitting the ground, mobilizing, campaigning. And when they turn their backs, if they're not benefiting anymore, the ANC could literally lose a lot of support. But what I would say to these types of people that exist in this bloc is that 2 words: broader society. A government exists to benefit the broader society. So it's not just about looking at yourself and what you have achieved, because what is the point of having 14% of the population being taxpayers, working, earning an income, and all of that, and then you've got a whole other large portion of the population that is not economically active. That's why we've got all of these problems. And then addressing questions around inequality, race classification. This was a question that was brought forward by the leader of the ACDP.
Honorable Reverend K.R.J. Mishra.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. President, I heard you well. But it is not correct that after 30 years of democracy, you still have, on paper, a racial classification, because it makes those who know they are African, as you just said, but they are not treated as Africans. Maybe because they're not dark enough. This has to be corrected. You cannot tell me, Mr. President, that you are not smart enough to come with another idea rather than race classification. I understand that there is a challenge, there is a problem that has to be addressed, and government is trying to use that. But are you saying to me that the apartheid people, the apartheid government, was more intelligent than you? That they came up with that racial classification? You have to repeat what they said because you don't have another idea. So I'm pleading with you. You are smart, we know that. Come with another
Honorable
idea
member, your time
rather than
is
racial
up.
classification. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Honorable President.
Thank you, Honorable Reverend Misha. Hey, what a one trumpa mamuta. What I'm smart, Kyalevo. No, as I did say, Honorable Misha, that yes, we are still dogged by the classification of the past. And as it is to rid ourselves of that form of classification, we do need to take steps to say this group and that group and that group were previously disadvantaged. And we therefore have to take steps to ensure that they are put in a better position when it comes to a whole range of areas, ownership, employment, and so forth. Because if we don't do that, then it basically means that we are accepting that everything is equalized when we know very well that it isn't. And there are those who would say that, you should no longer talk about what happened in the past. Forget what happened in the past, we must move on. I distinctly remember a British diplomat who said he lived in the US for 22 years. When I was on the state visit to the UK, he was an ambassador, part of the team that was chaperoning us. And he said, Mr. President, I understand the history of your country. He says, I lived in the US. I can still see, more than 100 years later, I can still see the effects of slavery. And it is therefore, he said, important that, yes, even the US government needs to take steps to make sure that it rids the United States of the effects of slavery. Because he says, I lived there for 22 years and I could see it every day. So those who would say, forget about apartheid, it was a bad dream, let's now all be united and move forward. In my view, it is like putting Band-Aid on a deep sore. That sore does need to be lanced, it needs to be properly repaired, and to repair it, you need to go to the depth of it and be able to do major repair work. And to do major repair work, you've got to name everything for what it is. Because unless you do so, we will never be able to rid our country of the legacy of the past. So that's what we need to do. So we therefore need to embark on programs. We therefore need to make sure that we rid our country of these classifications, in the end to see ourselves as South Africans and as Africans, less so as being colored, Indian or whatever, but just evolve a common identity. We can only do so by dealing with what caused the problem. Thank you.
So for me, Ramaphosa's response to this question suggests that he thinks what is more important is to first get the equality of outcome right. In order for us to address the injustices of the past, in order for us to eventually get to a point where we don't have to have race classification, we first need to achieve an equality of outcome where we all are rich, we are all driving a Maserati, we are all living in high-end apartments in Sandton in Cape Town, and we all have money, right? That's what I'm getting. And of course, it's definitely ideology speak at the same time, because, you know, Ramaphosa does come from the left side of the spectrum. Very, really problematic for me, because what this idea or this, ambition of saying you want equality of outcome, what this does is it neglects human nature completely. And this is a fundamental point to state, because human nature says we are all not the same. We are not all ambitious at the same level. Some people are lazy, some are not. Some people are very driven, some are not. Some people are willing to put in the hours and work till late to get something done. Some people want to sleep at 8 and they don't want. So how can we have an equality of outcome if that is what he is using as a benchmark to say, if we do not get the equality of outcome, we will continue having race classification? But it will never happen. There will never be a situation where we've got equality of outcome. We are not the same. We do not operate at the same level, in the same capacity. What we should be hearing from a responsible leader, if Ramaphosa was that responsible leader, what we should be hearing is equality of opportunity, which says in South Africa, whoever is committed, whoever invests time and puts in the work, whoever takes the risks, whoever tries and says, you know what, I'm going to put everything on the table, I'm going to try. There should be absolutely nothing holding that person back. Not their skin color, not their gender, not the creed. That is what equality of opportunity says. It says we are all equal in terms of what we can achieve. South Africa should be an environment that allows for that. And just this distinction, guys, it makes a huge difference, because now you are not trying to control who gets what. Instead, you're just saying, as a government, I need to make sure people are safe. I need to make sure across the board, education is decent quality, good hospitals. And that's obviously the hard part, right? That's where government tends to just shy away from that, because that's where then they need to put in the work. Another risk that Ramaphosa needs to understand to holding on to race classifications, right, is that, you know, race classifications over meritocracy, I know this debate does tend to come up, is that you just never know where good skills come from. You never know where great ideas lie. So if your viewpoint is that it has to be someone of this color, you will lose a lot of talented people. They're going to go to other countries. You're just going to demoralize excellent people who've got excellent and great ideas. Just some simple examples, right? Some popular names in terms of the business world. We've got Mark Shuttleworth. We've got Elon Musk. Both of these two people are born in South Africa, raised in South Africa to some extent, but they are big and prominent figures in the global space, in the global economy, right? Which just does not directly benefit South Africa. Why? For their own reasons, they found environments elsewhere to run their businesses. But who is to say that South Africa was not an option? Who is to say South Africa was not a consideration? But now, if you have all of these laws, all of these race classification, all of these policies, obviously that does hinder away investment. But now we have to understand that millionaires like Elon Musk, like Mark Shuttleworth, I know Jeff Bezos often speaks about the fact that he does not own 100% of Amazon. He owns a portion of it because now you've got shareholders, you've got people, partners and all of that. From one millionaire starting a business, starting something that is really cool and major, that can bring about more millionaires, right? Which is where Black people benefit. They benefit from growth. So embracing millionaires brings about more millionaires. And what I will say, it has taken me a bit of time personally as well, just to understand, is that everything needs time. Like you could have a situation where in South Africa today, like he's talking about people who own the means of production, are this particular person. But if you do this right thing over and over again, in time, that could completely turn around. It could completely reverse. Because now you've got Black people playing a big role in corporate, the seniors and all of that. Tomorrow, you will have Black people becoming excellent entrepreneurs because that development, that growth, a lot of people acknowledge the fact that for most of us, I'm probably the first person in my family to have a degree. So we are a generation of firsts in many areas, which means that it is going to take time. The development is going to take time. So there is no amount of social engineering that is going to speed this process up. We need to allow it organically to sort itself out, including embracing people who are skilled and entrepreneurs, which would also mean that this race classification is a hindrance to that, because people that are millionaires today are how we are going to be able to be millionaires tomorrow. That's how it works. We learn from each other. We grow from exposure, from looking at someone doing something. You copy that, you do it better for yourself, right? There is no amount of social engineering that can bring us to meaningful success, apart from just doing it the right way. And to wrap up, what I will say is that now this really puts a responsibility for us as South African citizens to really force our leaders to focus on meaningful solutions when it comes to dealing with these problems. Granted, these are very sensitive issues, right? You talk about past 30 years, no one takes for granted what has happened and where we come from. But I think it's time that we force them to start thinking about meaningful ways to be able to benefit, like I said, the broader society, not just a few 10% of the population who just so happen to be already skilled, already talented, and have close proximity to the government, right? Because that's not how you are able to effect the change. That's not how you move the country into the right direction. Gareth Cliff said something quite interesting during the Piers Morgan Uncensored debate, where he had a couple of South African people to talk about the Donald Trump thing and all of that. He said something to the effect of, when the ANC went to meet President Donald Trump, it probably was the first time that the ANC was treated like an adult, especially in a global stage. Because prior to this, a small country in southern tip of Africa, they're doing things there. No one really paid much attention until they got to meet Donald Trump. Because what happened in that meeting was that it was accountability time, right? It was accountability. Ramaphosa was asked questions. What's happening in your country? People are being, hurt and murdered here and there. The crosses, the chant, all of these things were brought to the table. And to some extent, it was uncomfortable to watch, because we realized that these people do not even take accountability for what they do in this country. It had to take a leader in another country to sit them down and say, but what does this mean, right? And of course, after that meeting, Ramaphosa comes back. I saw him laughing, giggling, telling the story, which means it hasn't really sunk in. Then we need to be the ones that treat the ANC like adults. We need to be able to force them, treat them like adults, even if it means pushing them over to the opposition benches. We need to start treating them like the leaders of the society. The ANC, they are leaders. They always say, the GNU, we are leading, we are the ones. They must act like it. They must act like it. I find it so disturbing when Ramaphosa, whenever he speaks, whether it's SONA or even this question and answer session, where whenever he uses a benchmark, he takes 30 years ago. I'm like, even in business, if you work in corporate, you would know the way that business measures itself, it's the previous year or maybe June this year versus May in the same year. Because that's how you're able to effectively measure whether or not you are growing. Now, if you say 2025 versus 1994, you are going to miss the bigger picture, because it means that you're comparing yourself to 30 years later. So many things have changed, things have evolved. Then maybe there wasn't even smartphones, or I don't remember, but I'm just saying that this thing of Ramaphosa, every single time when he has to answer, he says, 30 years ago, what happened to measuring yourself to 2024? Why don't we look at the last SONA that you gave? What have you done since then? Because that's when you're able to connect the dots and pick up on these trends that keep affecting and bringing us to the same position year in, year out.
We will now proceed. The first supplementary question will be asked by the Honourable Mulder.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Thank you, Honourable President, for a very comprehensive reply, an impressive reply, making it very clear all the steps that are being taken by government. And if there's one thing that the Government of National Unity, I think, have in common is the commitment to economic growth. And a lot of things, the things that you mentioned this afternoon is in terms of Operation Vulindlela. And we accept that, and if I understand it correctly, it means to open the way, but the way is not open. There's a problem with the way, with all due respect. I want to say that if you look at the World Bank's report, it clearly indicates that the average growth at the moment for developing countries is around 4%. If you look at the top 10 African countries, the growth rates there vary between the lowest 5.9% to 7.9%. Even in terms of all the things that you have now mentioned this afternoon, your own Minister of Finance in the budget last week indicated that our current growth rate is 1.4, hopefully next year 1.6, despite all the programs, hopefully in the year thereafter 1.8%. Our unemployment is 32%. Something is wrong. There's a huge problem. And the problem, Honourable President, is that all the issues that you mentioned, and all the wonderful programs and the investments, as far as I'm concerned, are based on the current economic policy of government, the underlying economic policy. Now, that's why I asked the question specifically, are you prepared to take the initiative and to take the necessary steps to amend, to develop an economic policy that can make possible real economic growth in South Africa? Because that's what we need. If we don't have real economic growth, none of the programs that you've mentioned will be successful, none of them will be implemented. But that real new economic policy, as far as I'm concerned, needs to take a different approach with regard to certain basic things that I don't know if you're prepared to do that with regard to black economic empowerment, with regard to equity, employment equity.
Thank you, Honourable Mulder. Your time has expired.
Expropriation without compensation. Are you prepared to do that? Thank you, sir.
The President.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. I did say that the Government of National Unity is going to spend a considerable amount of hours in a number of days to come just discussing the economic strategy and trajectory that we should pursue. Our ambition, Honourable Member, Dr. Mulder, is to make sure that our economy grows higher than what the projections are currently. That is our ambition. And the medium-term development plan gives the pointers of where we should be going. What the Minister of Finance also articulated on this platform also gives the pointers of where we are headed. And I'm rather surprised and taken aback when I hear that policies of black economic empowerment militate against the growth of our economy. That I find quite surprising, because I work from the starting point that our economy was held back over many years by the racist policies of the past. Those racist policies prevented all South Africans, or the majority of South Africans, to play a meaningful role in the economy of their own country. They were brought in, black people were brought in as hewers of wood and drawers of water. And they were just brought in as laborers. They were not even seen as consumers. They were not seen as active players in the economic landscape of our country. With democracy, what has now been happening, and what we seek to see happening, is the opening up of the economy, the broadening up of economic participation, which, if you observe, Honorable Dr. Mulder, you will actually see, and it's right in your face. You know, in apartheid South Africa, if you looked, for instance, at adverts for commodities, you would never see a black person being made to advertise either soap or milk or anything. Today, every advert you look at has got black people, because it's now been realized that it is black people who are the consumers, and they are economic players. Now, those who would want black people just to play the consumer role are truly mistaken. Black people must play a productive role as well. So I am really baffled. I'm baffled by people who still hanker for policies of the past. And to have you, sir, saying black economic empowerment is holding our economy back goes completely against even what the World Bank says. Now, this I find quite surprising, because what is known very clearly as well is that, and a few years ago, the World Bank and the IMF came up with a report that one of the things that holds South Africa's economy back from growth is the level of concentration. Concentration, because they said the ownership of the economy is in far too few hands. Ownership has not spread. That is what the World Bank and IMF said. And that is precisely what happens in other countries. When you go to other countries, you will find the citizens. I mean, in Africa, it will largely be black people. Wherever you go in the world, it will be the citizens. Now, in our country, it was just the few privileged, and may I continue to say white people, who continue to own the means of production, who continue to own the productive economy of our country. Now,
We took them to America.
Now, this I find very worrying. I find it very worrying that we continue to have this notion that BEE is the one that's holding our economy back. It is the partial and exclusive ownership of the means of production in our country that is holding this economy from growing. So, what we seek to do, as set out in the Equality Clause in our Constitution, to redress the imbalances of the past. If we accept that the ownership of our economy is imbalanced, the clause on equality in our Constitution seeks to undo that, to redress that. So therefore, ownership of our economy should be broadened. And I can tell you, Dr. Mulder, there's nothing that gives our people joy, particularly black people, as they go around and they find that this production facility is owned by a black person. It warms one's heart. It makes us feel so good, because we've come from a horrible past when that was not allowed by law, where people were arrested If you wanted to set up an economic facility in town, you were put to jail. But today, we are saying all that must be put behind us. We must allow more and more people to play an important role in the economy of our country. And this is what baffles me by those who are opposed to Black economic empowerment. I say, what do you want to see happening? Do you want to see Black people continuing to play the role of laborers, drawers of water, hewers of wood, and consumers only? Why can't Black people be made to own productive aspects of our economy? Why can't they be rich as well? That is what needs to happen. Because it is when they get to that level. Dr. Mulder, you look at the Afrikaners, the history of your people. If you look at the history of your people, they were held back by the English. And with later days, they were enabled. They became more and more economically empowered. And they became economically empowered due to the policies of apartheid, the laws that were put in place, the sweet deals that they were given, and they started getting more and more into being serious economic players. Why can't the same be done for Black people? Why? And this baffles me. Really, I don't understand it, because to me that is the normal thing to do. You need, as a nation, to say, this group has been disempowered. It's been disempowered, we need to empower it. Like the approach we have now, the rural areas of our country have been disadvantaged, and we're seeking to direct more and more assistance and empowerment to the rural areas, so that the rural areas also come up. Now, anyone who will tell me that that is wrong, really, I think they must have their heads examined, because that cannot be the case. So, my answer, therefore, is our objective is to spread economic participation broadly. And I will hold on to the argument that the more we have